G'day guys and welcome back to JC's 9.1.5 Arms Warrior PvP guide. Today we're breaking down damage, playstyle and compositions. First we'll dissect damage, we'll look at how to do your rotation, and we'll look at how to burst people and blow them the fuck up. Playstyle, we'll look at how to play the warrior in the arena, and finally we'll finish the video with the best 2v2 and 3v3 compositions to lead you to your arena goals in patch 9.1.5. Alright, let's get stuck in. Rightio, to really understand how to do damage as the warrior class, you need to know the passive abilities of the class. So the first one we're looking at is Tactician. That's going to give you a 1.4% chance per rage you spend to reset the cooldown of Overpower, and this is going to contribute heavily to our consistent damage output. Next one we're looking at is Seasoned Soldier, and it's going to cause auto attack critical strikes to generate 30% more rage. This is the reason that crit build is so good in this patch. It's going to allow you to do big damage whilst generating rage. Generally you need that haste build to generate rage, but we're in a position now where we can do crits to generate rage instead. And finally, looking at our mastery, which is Deep Wounds for arms, going to cause Mortal Strike, Warbreaker and Bladestorm to cause deep wounds, dealing bleed damage over 12 seconds, and increasing the damage the affected enemy takes from you by a percentage determined by your mastery percentage. As we know, mastery is our weakest stat though, so this isn't particularly important. Righto, on to our rotation. So what you see there before you is the priority we're going to be following in a general game to deal damage to the target. Now, I'm going to go through each of these abilities to explain what the priority means. So firstly, Execute is going to be your main priority only if it is guaranteed to finish the target. If it's not, Hamstring is going to be more important. The reason that I say this is it gives you a 50% movement speed debuff to the target, which is going to allow you to stick to that target. If you don't have a slow on the target, you're going to be dealing no damage, and that's why it is so critical. Right, following Hamstring, Mortal Strike is of the highest priority, only for the purpose of maintaining mortal wounds though, and that is our 25% reduction to healing received by the enemy target. You can't let this fall off. It puts a lot of pressure on the enemy team and can do more so than dealing damage under some circumstances. Moving on from these parameters, Execute is going to deal the most damage, so it's of the highest priority. When you get those sudden death procs, you can do a large amount of damage then and there, which is going to cause a lot of pressure for the enemy healer to try and heal through. And again, when you get a target low, putting out those consistent executes is going to deal a lot of damage. Following this, Mortal Strike is of the highest priority just for the purpose of dealing damage, and then Overpower. A little bit of a point here too. Overpower is going to stack up twice, and it's going to give you the ability to cause Mortal Strike to deal more damage. Don't go out of your way to stack up these Overpowers and deal more damage with the Mortal Strike. Under most circumstances, it's not worth it. You could pull them for a burst. Sometimes I'll throw out an Overpower, then Mortal Strike if I've got both off cooldown, but don't prioritize that. You do get 2 charges of Overpower with the Dreadnought talent, which is fantastic. You're also going to get that Tactician passive and the Conduit Crash the Ramparts, which is going to increase the ability's damage again. This is responsible for a lot of your consistent damage output as a warrior. On to the debate between Ignore Pain and Slam. So Ignore Pain ignores 50% of damage taken, and this is going to occur to around 8 to 10k once you're fully geared. So this amount is increased again by the Conduit. Brutal Vitality, making it an excellent return on investment for the rage you spend. Slam, however, is going to be a poor rage for damage trade, and you should really only use it when you have more rage than you can spend. So Ignore Pain is a far better choice for filling. If all of your abilities are on cooldown and you do have low rage, you can pull the slot machine handle and try and get a Tactician proc with the use of Slam. You might get a free Overpower, which can start you back on your consistent rotation, but I don't really recommend doing that unless you have no other choice. So, to break down the debate between the use of Ignore Pain and the use of Slam, we're going to consider damage input versus damage output. So a non-critical strike, Slam's going to do about 2k damage at the cost of 20 rage. To make the comparison, we need to consider the use of 40 rage, which means we need to consider the use of 2 Slams for the use of 1 Ignore Pain. So at the input of 2 Slams, you're going to get around 4 to 5k damage. With the use of 1 Ignore Pain, you're going to prevent around 9 to 10k damage incoming. That's not even considering the Brutal Vitality Conduit. So you can see there that the math is going to favor Ignore Pain. The only time it's going to favor Slam is if you've got all your offensive cooldowns up and you get a critical strike. So really use Ignore Pain as a filler as opposed to Slam. If you are bursting, sometimes the damage can be more important if you're not under any pressure at all. So you need to make the determination yourself in the moment. If you're bursting, you want to do as much damage as you possibly can, and you're not under any pressure and you don't need to use Ignore Pain, Slam can be more worth it in that scenario. Other ability I want to touch on, Whirlwind. It's a piece of poo-poo-poo. You don't want to use it. You can have it off your bars. In PvP, it just simply doesn't deal enough damage to the target, so forget about Whirlwind. Alright, we've learned a little bit about the warrior rotation here. So let's say you're new to warrior, you want to learn to maximize the damage you output as the warrior class. You won't hear me say this very often, but this might include doing some PvE. So you could do some 2v2 as well and kind of focus on just dealing damage and forget about the other aspects of warrior gameplay. What you need to try and achieve here, so the aim is to perfect your rotation in such a way that you need to allocate very little of your mental resources to achieving the consistent output of the rotation, and then you can start to implement the other important tools and really perfect utilizing this class in PvP. We understand the sequence in which we need to press our abilities now. Now I want to teach you a little bit about doing AoE damage outside of your burst. So the way to do this is going to be using Sweeping Strikes. It's going to cause your single target damaging abilities to hit one additional target for 75% effectiveness, and you'll get the Sweeping Strikes effect for 12 seconds. I think Sweeping Strikes is a really underutilized ability, and if you're not aware, it can spread other abilities such as Hamstring, Mortal Wounds, Rend, and Sharpened Blade. So it allows you to get more out of these abilities and allows you to get more value for your rage investment. An extra tip to keep in mind is that Sweeping Strikes shares the same cooldown as Piercing Howl, which can make it very hard for melee cleaves to get away with you whilst you're absolutely kicking their little dickies off. When you're bursting, Sweeping Strikes can also help to do an overwhelming amount of damage, especially when you pair it with cooldowns like Warbreaker, Spear of Bastion, and Conqueror's Banner. It can be absolutely ridiculous when you're playing Necrolord Warrior. You've got Sweeping Strikes up and you're just taking chunks out of everybody around you. Sometimes you don't even need cross CC to finish people in these circumstances, so I can't stress enough the importance of Sweeping Strikes. You need to always be looking for opportunities to utilize Sweeping Strikes effectively to get the most out of your damage as this class. Alrighty, let's talk about bursting. So the aim of burst is to stack damage modifiers to cause large spikes of damage to the enemy team to either kill them or cause them to overuse defensive cooldowns so that you can kill them later. You need to burst under optimal conditions if possible. So what I mean by this is you want to burst as early on in the game as you possibly can because you want to establish momentum. You want to put the enemy team on the back foot and establish yourself in a dominant position. This can ride you out through the entirety of the game if it's done correctly. So when you have CC on the target and cross CC on their teammates is another ideal position to find yourself in. You also want to seek to look at your DRs and see what DRs you're on to see if the enemy team can disrupt your attempt at bursting. You want to do this as uninterrupted as you possibly can. And you also want to seek to burst during enemy bursts to counter their go. You want to put them under pressure when they're attempting to put you under pressure. If you allow them to trade their burst without trading burst back in their direction, they're going to get momentum against you and you're going to find yourself running away to try and recover. Just pop everything, pop your defensive and then pop your cooldowns and just fucking start zapping back into them and try and get them on the back foot. It is okay to hold your burst buttons to use them under optimal conditions. So don't fall into the trap of throwing out these buttons as they come off cooldown. You really want to hold them to maximize your burst windows so you can make your burst and your goes as clean as you possibly can to force the enemy team to trade cooldowns or trade more defensive cooldowns than they'd like to. I had that clip playing in the background there for you. I don't get that Shaman low in the opener, but I force him to trade every single defensive cooldown he has, which means he's going to have nothing later on in a minute's time when my cooldowns come back up and I can have another go and I can kick him square in the penile. Righto, on the topic of burst, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of Warbreaker. It's going to give you increased 30% damage for 10 seconds, which is actually bigger than Avatar. So Avatar on paper seems like a massive cooldown, super cool, fucking bush, bash people. Warbreaker is actually bigger. So you want to do whatever you can to protect your usages of Warbreaker. The use of Warbreaker can be somewhat situational, but I believe it should be held to burst alongside other cooldowns such as Stormbolt and Spear of Bastion if you're Kyrian to get the maximum benefit out of its use. You also want to ensure that you have sufficient rage at the time to maximize your damage during this window and that your rotation is at the correct point. And what I mean by that is you don't want to throw Warbreaker out when you've got let's say Mortal Strike and Overpower on cooldown, because what are you going to do? Are you going to sit there and slam? It's not efficient to use it like that. You need to make sure you've got the rage to use it, and in addition to this, you want to make sure your rotation is at the correct point. If it's not, just wait for those abilities to come off cooldown, get ready, then set it up with the use of those other abilities, like I said, Stormbolt and Spear. You can also even pair this with the Badge of Ferocity to get more out of it every minute. It can make your goes every minute enormous. It's very hard to deal with for the enemy team when you're using Stormbolt, pushing the damage into the kill target, and you're getting cross CC with your teammates to really maximize the benefit of your Warbreaker windows. The use of Weak Aura has resulted though in Warbreaker being immediately disarmed as the cooldown of Warbreaker is synchronized with the Warrior, Rogue and Monk disarm. So you need to get a little bit creative to protect your Warbreaker to maximize that damage. Some good ways to do this would include taking advantage of the 80-yard radius and be at max distance, as Disarm's radius is only 5 yards, but keep in mind Monk's Disarm is a 30-yard radius, so they're going to get you no matter what. I like to also use Blade Storm immediately after I put out Warbreaker, though most warriors are going to either, if they're, I guess, in Stormbolt, Trinket and disarm you immediately, or try and disarm you following that global. So you need to utilize some range to pull this off. And what I mean by that is I would have Stormbolt on the target. I would then Warbreaker, then throw out my Spear. I'll walk a little bit away in case they're going to Trinket whilst I'm in global. I'll get the Blade Storm off and then I'll walk back into the Spear. You can cancel the Blade Storm when you've had Warbreaker on there for a few seconds, as it's no longer going to be worth using Disarm into that Warbreaker for the enemy Warrior or Rogue. In addition to these options, you can use Die by the Sword to prevent Disarm, but keep in mind this won't work against monks. This really should only be done if you're going to intervene, parry incoming damage, or you're the kill target and you're under pressure, or you're certain it's going to result in a kill. Don't just do it because you're frustrated. I can't stress that enough. I've done it because I get a little bit cranky and I just want a Warbreaker and go ham on these motherfuckers. But don't let them bait you. Don't get frustrated. Only do this if you know it's going to end in a kill. Another option too would be stacking other damage modifiers to try and bait the disarm, and then I guess disconnect the synchronicity between Warbreaker and disarm for the enemy player, and then you can try and sneak those Warbreaker windows out uninterrupted because they won't have disarm to stop you from getting that damage out. Okay, we know our rotation, we've talked a bit about burst, let's talk about opening a game. So I want to start by saying charge is not on the global cooldown, and now this is advantageous because you can use the travel time to save GCDs by using abilities such as Stormbolt, Avatar and Sweeping Strikes whilst you're traveling, so that you don't need to use them when you arrive at the target. You can then start to implement your rotation or your burst rotation from there. Prior to the game engaging, you want to organize what CC is going to be allocated to which enemy target, and then stack all of those damage modifiers to do the maximum damage. Your opening go is going to be the biggest go you'll do of the game, and if you get it done right, it's going to either give you enough momentum to win then and there, or ride you out through the rest of the game and give you a significant amount of pressure against the enemy team. As an example, if I'm playing WPS, which is my main comp, I would be Stormbolting the kill target and having the Shadow Priest stun silence the healer. Essentially, if you're going to press charge and Stormbolt, press your macro, use all of your damage modifiers that aren't on the global cooldown, you'll arrive at the target as Stormbolt does. Warbreaker, use 1 to 2 damage globals, then Spear and follow your rotation. It'll be similar for Necrolord, but obviously Conqueror's Ben is going to replace Spear, and the target won't be locked down following Stormbolt. So use Piercing Howl as Stormbolt ends to maximize your uptime on that target. So a discussion surrounding how to do damage and how to burst isn't complete without talking about our mobility and uptime based tools. So these would include, for example, a strange one to begin with, your mount, charge, heroic leap, Stormbolt, Spear of Bastion, Spell Reflect, Blaze Storm, and the Avatar Root Break. If you overtrade on these abilities, you're going to find yourself stuck in the middle of the arena, unable to connect to certain classes. So this is going to decrease your uptime, decrease the damage that you deal, and increase the pressure that you're receiving considerably. This is going to hurt both you and your healer, and is going to cause your team to make more mistakes overall. So if you're versing, for example, double caster, let's say mage and a warlock, you need to trade your mobility tools carefully and time things like spell reflect and blade storm to keep yourself aggressive and prevent the enemy team from peeling you during kill window opportunities or when you've got some decent pressure rolling. You need to use these abilities with purpose and in response to enemy ability usage. So you're going to be punished if you don't do this. I'll give you some examples. If a mage uses blink, it's going to be okay to charge. If a warlock ports, it's going to be okay to leap. And if you get rooted for maximum or half duration, it is okay to blade storm. If you've got some pressure, for example, on the enemy team and a poly is incoming, it's going to be okay to use spell reflect. You cannot just throw these abilities out, or when you end up in these circumstances I've just gone over, you're not going to be able to respond efficiently to the enemy ability usage and you're going to be punished. Another valuable tip you need to know against mobile classes is don't overuse your mobility tools to get to them in the opener. It isn't necessary to, for example, charge or leap towards a mage or warlock when you can just run up on your mount. I would say that an example where that'd be incorrect is if a lock's going to run out and start to try and get the demonic gateway out. You just don't want to overtrade on these abilities when you don't need to. Get on your mount, run directly on top of a mage, and just piercing hell or hamstring. Don't charge to him, because when he blinks, you're going to have to leap, and then when he gets away again, you have no answer to his mobility tool usage. Alright, let's move away from damage and talk about warrior playstyle. So despite what people generally think, especially those at lower rating, warrior is not an easy class. The class is criticised for the answers it's going to provide to the abilities of a lot of other classes. However, to efficiently use these tools, you need to have awareness and see the available opportunities and possess the game knowledge to match each of your tools to the appropriate ability used by your opponent. So a lot of the tools are going to also require very precise timing, and if used the wrong way, you're going to lose the game for your team. I'll give you the example of intervene. If you're just throwing out intervene and using it, you'll get effectiveness, I guess, at lower rating, but at high rating, it really needs to be used to absorb incoming burst from the enemy team at a specific time. Another example would be the use of War Banner. You really need to know what you're doing to be able to time that for incoming CC, especially when you're trying to get things like kidney shot or blind. It can even be difficult to get a hunter's trap because you need to predict the length of the stun that happens before the trap comes out, throw down the banner which has a delay, and then absorb the trap. So it is not easy to utilize these tools that make warrior powerful despite people thinking that it actually is. Despite making an argument for warrior being a difficult class, I think it is, however, fair to say that one can be effective at dealing damage as a warrior and fail to use their utility optimally and still comfortably play at a duelist level. And I think this is where the majority of the misconception comes from. Alrighty, let's rip into warrior arena playstyle. This is all about giving them the fucking D, all three of them. So let me introduce you to the 3 Ds of warrior playstyle: damage, defend, and disrupt. So essentially, your objective is to maximize your consistent damage output by optimizing your damage output whilst simultaneously using your utility abilities to defend your allies and disrupt your enemies. Disrupt and defend kind of cross over as they share the same pool of abilities and offer similar results, though I would say the two functions are fundamentally different. Disruption is essentially about countering enemy ability use, whilst defending is more about providing a solution to enemy damage. Take intervene, for example. I can use it as a disruptive tool to prevent physical CC against my healer, such as a kidney shot or a storm bolt, or I can use that as a defensive tool to prevent damage done against one of my teammates. Damage we can break down into 2 components, and we've already discussed this: consistent damage output and our burst. As part of the class's playstyle, you should aim to set up coordinated goes around your Stormbolt, your offensive cooldowns, and your Covenant ability, so either Conqueror's Banner or Spear of Bastion. I think one of, if not the main differentiating factor between Duelist and Gladiator Warriors is the ability to seamlessly perform all 3 of the Ds without disrupting the optimal performance of the others. Right, we've talked a bit about how to do damage, we've talked a bit about how to play as a warrior. Now, who by Odin's bid are we going to play this fucking game with? Well, warriors are very fortunate, and we probably have more comps available to us than any other class. We can play with every single DPS class / spec combination, other than rogues really because of the shared DRs on stuns, and you can really play with every healer. I'd say Disc and Holy probably have the least synergy with warrior, but you can still definitely play with these classes. There really are a lot of comps,
and I can't go over all of them because we'll be here for fucking hours. So I'm going to pick the ones that I think are the strongest in patch 9.1.5, and we'll break those down and you'll have a bit of idea what to play. Righty, as for that 2v2 bracket, you can play with anything you want, really. Your strongest two compositions are going to be Warrior, Resto Druid, and Warrior, Resto Shaman, and I would probably say in that order. Warrior Resto Druid is far more forgiving, and it's a really good comp because Druids offer amazing healing throughput and CC, so you can either win by outplaying your opponents, or you can win by attrition, so prolonging the game, going into dampening, and making your opponents fucking cry. The other option is Warrior Resto Shaman. This is really good because it offers excellent offensive pressure. So essentially, Shaman's going to give you Dwayne. He's going to fucking pound your target as well. The Shaman can purge the nasties off the enemy players like, you know, your Bops, your Mage Shields. And you're going to have great utility with a Shaman such as Wind Shear and Grounding Totem, which is going to enable you to play more aggressively against casters. You do need to coordinate Grounding and Wind Shear with your own utility such as Kick and Spell Reflect, but after a bit of practice, this isn't too difficult to do. Right, like I was saying, we are particularly fortunate this season because we are an S tier class. We really can play whatever comp we want to. You're going to have people crawling up to you on all fours saying, "Daddy, pick me, please." But your best two comps are going to be Ret, Warrior, Resto Druid. You can substitute Resto Druid for any other healer and it's still going to be a very strong composition. Or Warrior, Shadow Priest, Resto Shaman / Resto Druid. Now, I'd say that Ret, Warrior, Resto Druid is going to sit amongst the strongest compositions in the game. So if you're trying to get that first Gladiator, probably going to be your best choice. The aim as Ret Warrior is to stack your offensive cooldowns and other damage modifiers to win by one-shotting or causing the enemy team to overexert their defensive cooldowns. You'll essentially then win in the next go. This comp is very durable with Ret and Warrior utility, and the Warrior is going to contribute consistent damage output, whilst the Ret contributes considerable burst damage. Execution revolves setup around Stormbolt and Hodge being on the same cooldown. Hodge is going to go onto the kill target with Stormbolt on the healer due to its range. You need to Stormbolt first so the healer does not dispel that Hodge from the kill target. Once that CC has essentially landed, you're going to throw all the fucking damage you can into the kill target and just hope to baby Jesus that you've pulled the slot machine trigger and they're going to be deleted. If you are playing Ret Warrior, your Covenant choice is going to be Necro. I say this because the main stat for Retribution Paladins is Mastery, and Conqueror's Bennett is going to give them 400 Mastery, and it's going to give them more power to delete people. You can play Kyrian, but it just simply is not as strong. You want to be Necrolord if you're playing this comp. On to your A+ tier choice, Warrior, Priest, Shaman / Druid. The aim of this comp is to dish out high consistent damage and use your defensive tools to survive to enable you to set up goes every 1 minute. Your goes will combine offensive cooldowns and CC to overwhelm your opponents. Your CC is instant, so there really isn't much the enemy team can do to stop you other than trinket or preemptively commit defensives. This comp is extremely disruptive and excellent at protecting the Shaman or Druid from CC with tools like Master Spell, Intervene and Warbanner. Your pressure is also supplemented by the double purge that the Shaman and the Shadow Priest bring, and the combination of Siphene and Sharpened Blade with the 1 minute setup. So you'll do your setup and use those healing reduction tools following the setup. The setup's going to look something like this. Stormbolt into Spear with cap out on the kill target. The Shadow Priest is going to silence and stun the healer with a Panda out if they have access to that, but then a Fear or Hex is going to come out on the healer. It's also going to involve your Warbreaker and the Shadow Priest's Unholy Infusion, which summons that little rattling mage that goes berserk on motherfuckers. These two abilities actually will line up if you hold Warbreaker for 15 seconds, and I can assure you this is most certainly worth it because it will really go a long way to deleting people rapidly as opposed to allowing them to get out of CC and try and catch up, and sometimes they can scramble and catch back up and you're not going to finish the game. So like I said, once the enemy healer is leaving CC, you then Sharpen Blade or Siphene, and that's going to cause them to not only have to deal with that target being on low HP, but the healing reduction as well. It's very difficult to deal with and very oppressive. As for your Covenant choices, I'd say you can play either. I personally really prefer Kyrian though, as the 1 minute setup with the Spear of Bastion and Unholy Nova, which is a Shadow Priest legendary, feels very solid, and Spear is an excellent tool for peeling against melee cleaves, which are going to be the biggest problems for this composition. So there really are a lot of other viable comps. Another example would be Warrior Boomy Resto Shaman. It's got to be a Resto Shaman though, because you need the Purge, and the Warrior must be Necro for the synergy with the Boomy Legendary. So essentially the Boomy Legendary, the Covenant determines the effect the Boomkin Legendary will provide to the player, and Necrolord's going to cause it to give you an inherent 8% increase to your versatility, then every minute an extra 8% as well. You can stack this with your other damage modifiers, and you just absolutely destroy people. And it's a very, very fun composition to play. Another cool choice too would be Thundercleave, which is going to be Arms Warrior, Elemental Shaman, and in this circumstance you want Resto Shaman. The comp is a wizard's absolute fucking worst nightmare. You're going to have double grounding, you're going to have double purge, you're going to have 2 range kicks, a warrior kick alongside a warrior spell reflect and warband. Imagine trying to go through that. Has excellent setup with Stormbot on the healer and Lightning Lasso on the kill target, and the warrior can just go to fucking town. Ellies can also put out immense damage and absolutely delete people. It's a really well-rounded composition, really oppressive and really frustrating to play against. There's a lot of melee cleaves at your disposal too. You've got the option of Windwalker Warrior Healer. You've got TSG with Warrior, Frost Death Knight Healer, KFC, which is Warrior, Hunter Healer. Turbo's another very strong comp. It hasn't seen a lot of play at the beginning of the season. I'm starting to see its resurgence. Turbo is Warrior, Enhanced Shaman, Healer, and another really cool option is Kitty Cleave, which is Warrior, Feral Druid, and Healer. Really good comps to play. They're all very strong comps, though, like I said, Rep Warrior is going to be your S tier pick, WPS is your A+ tier, and then these compositions you can play. They're all very powerful, but those 2 comps would be your preference. Final video, we're going to focus on macros and add-ons. I've had so many questions about my add-ons. Don't worry guys, I'll put together a video, I'll break them down, I'll show you why they're useful, I'll tell you what their names are, and you can go and pick them up yourself and implement them into your gameplay. Alright guys, that's going to do us for damage, playstyle and compositions. I hope you liked this video, and again I hope it helps you. If you did, let me know in the comments below, give it a thumbs up. Any more content that you'd like to see, anything specific, leave a comment below and let me know. People have been putting requests in, I've heard them, and I'm putting those videos together for those people. Subscribe if you want to see when my next video comes out, as it comes out, and have a very Merry Christmas, you beautiful little fucking deviants, and a Happy New Year. See you in the next video.